The Weaver's Clockwork Heart. The year is 1957. The town of Silent Hollow, nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, was a place where time seemed to flow differently, where the veil between worlds was thin, and where shadows seemed to possess their own sentience. A town steeped in folklore and whispers, where the line between reality and nightmare often blurred. It was also a town where people disappeared, swallowed by the maw of time, never to be seen again. The story begins with the arrival of a young woman named Eleanor Vance, a clockmaker's apprentice, on the 9th of April. She had been summoned by a cryptic letter, penned in elegant cursive on aged parchment, promising answers to her family's mysterious past. A past shrouded in secrets and whispers, curses passed down through generations. The letter had been found hidden in a secret compartment of her grandfather's workbench, along with a strange, intricately crafted key made of brass and bone. The letter also spoke of, "The curse of your family is not from the past but from the future, and that future is found in the heart." These words, inked in strange characters, seemed to pulse on the page, filling Eleanor with both dread and unwavering hope. Driven by a curiosity that was a mixture of hope and trepidation, Eleanor took the letter as a sign and journeyed to Silent Hollow. She arrived on a day when the sky was an unnatural gray, like a shroud drawn across the heavens. The silence of the town pressed in on her, as if the very stones were watching her, judging her. The town was shrouded in a perpetual mist, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, akin to ozone and rust, an odor of old blood and the dust of centuries. As her old bus rattled into the town, she noticed the silhouettes of houses seemed to move for a moment, but it was fleeting, and she dismissed it as fatigue. She headed for the only inn, the Silent Bell, a place as ominous as its name. The sign over the door was crooked, the ink on it running like the sign was weeping onto the old wood. The innkeeper, a gaunt man with eyes that seemed to reflect the eternal twilight of the town, led her to a room on the 3rd floor, a room that felt colder than it should have, a room where the walls seemed to whisper secrets in a forgotten tongue. The room smelled of stale dust and ancient herbs, and on the walls were remnants of strange drawings, as if someone once tried to create a map there. Sleep was elusive for Eleanor. She lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the silence, which was anything but silent. She heard the ticking of clocks, not the ordinary ticking of her own clocks, but something more ancient and mechanical, like the turning gears of a vast machine somewhere beyond the walls. And she heard whispers, just at the edge of her hearing, as if they were trying to tell her something, but the words were always unclear, sounding like ancient prayers or curses. In the night, she saw strange shadows dancing on the walls, taking shapes of odd animals or distorted faces. The next day, she began exploring the town, hoping to find answers. The town was mostly abandoned, most of the shops boarded up, and the houses crumbling with age, as if the earth itself had swallowed them. She saw no other people, only cats with eyes that burned bright in the gloom. She found an old clock shop, nestled at the end of a winding alley, its sign almost entirely faded. The sign read, "Seraphina's Workshop." Eleanor felt an unnatural pull towards it, as if some unseen force was guiding her. Inside, she found rows of clocks, both large and small, all stopped at different times, all covered in a thick layer of dust, as if time itself had decided to stop here. She cautiously touched one of the clocks and felt a strange prick in her finger, as if sharp needles had touched her skin. Wandering through the shop, she stumbled upon a hidden workshop at the back, a room filled with strange tools and intricate mechanisms, all coated in grime and draped in cobwebs. Time seemed to both stop and go backward here. On a workbench in the center, she found a half-finished clock, unlike anything she had ever seen. Its frame was made of dark wood, like something that grew in the night, and its gears of polished brass, like teardrops frozen in time. But its most striking feature was its heart, a complex, miniature mechanism that seemed to beat with its own unnatural rhythm, a mechanism both beautiful and disturbing, like a living creature trapped within metal. She felt a strong pull towards it, as if she didn't choose, but the mechanism chose her, drawing her into its web. By the 17th of April, Eleanor began having strange dreams, Dreams of gears and cogs, of shifting corridors and distorted figures, of a woman shrouded in shadows who seemed to both weave and unravel threads of time. The woman looked like a shadow, made of concentrated darkness, but her hands, although thin and fragile, moved with incredible power. She would wake up with the feeling that these dreams were not just dreams, but something else, as if they were fragments of someone else's memory. She began to find time unreliable, sometimes losing whole hours without realizing it, sometimes finding herself in places she didn't recognize, as if she had traveled through time without her consent. Once, waking from another nightmare, she found bloody marks on her hand, like they were from gears, and they did not disappear. On the 23rd of April, she found a secret compartment in the base of the unfinished clock, and inside, she discovered a small journal bound in leather. The book was old, its leather cracked, but it still held together well. The pages were filled with spidery handwriting and strange diagrams. She learned that the journal belonged to a woman named Serafina, a clockmaker who had lived in Silent Hollow long ago. Reading through it, she learned of Serafina's obsession with time and her belief that it could be manipulated and controlled, that it was not linear but a tapestry to be woven and unraveled. Serafina believed time was not a straight line, but a huge wheel with thousands of spokes, and she wanted to grasp this wheel in her hands. The journal detailed how Serafina began her experiments, studying ancient manuscripts and seeking knowledge of time in different cultures. She recounted her visits to ancient ruins, her search for clues to forgotten civilizations, her collection of ancient artifacts in the hope of finding the keys to manipulating time. Her early experiments often failed, but it never stopped her. Once, during an experiment, she had glanced into the window of time and saw there the abyss, and this abyss stayed within her, like a wound that bled through time. She wrote that time was not a river, but an ocean, with tides and ebbs, and that she wanted to become the mistress of this ocean. Serafina had built the clock to unravel the threads of time, to open gateways to other dimensions, and in her madness, she became lost in its labyrinth. Eleanor also discovered that her own family was connected to Serafina, that they were keepers, that they had tried to stop her madness but failed, and that they were cursed never to find peace, to be drawn between the threads of time. Their family curse was not from the past, but from the future, and each new keeper was doomed to repeat the fate of the past. When Eleanor read these words, she felt a chill, realizing her arrival was not of her own choice. She, like her ancestors, was drawn into a game she didn't understand. The heart of the clock chose its keeper, and no one could change it. On the 1st of May, Eleanor decided to finish the clock, believing it was the only way to break the curse and unravel the mystery. She worked tirelessly, day and night, the ticking of the clock filling her consciousness, like the pounding of blood in her temples. Her dreams grew more and more vivid, more and more real, and she felt like she was becoming part of something greater, something beautiful and terrifying. She started feeling increasingly detached, as if she was watching herself from the outside. Within her, an obsession began to grow, similar to Serafina's. Her dreams were no longer just dreams, but pieces of someone else's life, someone else's memory, and she felt herself growing more and more like Serafina, as if she was becoming her shadow in time. She learned of how the keepers of the past tried to stop Serafina, and she saw their horrible deaths, their cries, their pain. She saw how they had tried to destroy the clock, but failed. She learned that Serafina was far more powerful than they had imagined. After adding the final part, she saw strange marks appear on her hands, like imprints of gears, but they were now part of her skin, as if they had become grafted to her body. As she connected the final pieces, she began to see things that defied logic. The workshop walls seemed to shift and rearrange, the tools seemed to move on their own, and the shadows danced and took shape as if they were alive and tried to touch her, as if they wanted to pull her into their world. She began hearing whispers clearer and clearer, and she realized they weren't whispers at all, but a song, a haunting and beautiful melody that seemed to beckon her. The song was full of longing and hope. It was at the same time beautiful and terrifying. On the 10th of May, at exactly 3 in the morning, Eleanor completed the clock. As she set the final gear in place, the clock began to tick, and the clockwork heart began to beat with a sudden surge of energy, like a living heart that had broken out of its cage. The room seemed flooded with an unnatural light, like a small doorway had burst into another dimension, and she felt like she was being pulled in multiple directions, as if time itself was collapsing around her. She heard Serafina's voice, calling out to her. It sounded less like a whisper, but more like a loud scream, ripping through the very fabric of time. The clock shop began to transform. The walls dissolved and reconfigured into shifting corridors, as if they were made of mirrors. The rows of clocks began to melt into each other, creating a labyrinth that seemed endless. Each corridor looked different. In one, time flowed slowly, in another very quickly, and in another it did not exist at all. Some corridors looked like old clockwork mechanisms with gears turning at incredible speeds, while others looked like endless mirrored halls, reflecting Eleanor's face. In the center of this labyrinth, she saw the woman shrouded in shadows, Serafina, who was weaving and unraveling the threads of time, beckoning her to join her. Serafina was no longer a normal woman. She was part of the clock, part of that world between times. She was the heart of the labyrinth. She reached out to Eleanor, her eyes, like two burning coals, glowing with insane fire. Eleanor realized with bone-chilling horror that she had not finished the clock, but had become part of it, that she was now trapped in its labyrinth, and that time itself had become a prison. She was still in Silent Hollow, but it was no longer the same. It was now a place existing between the threads of time, and she was trapped there. Like a thread, Serafina was weaving into her terrifying tapestry. She tried to scream, but her voice was weak, like the whisper of the wind. Her soul no longer belonged to her. On the 25th of May, a young man named Samuel arrived in Silent Hollow, summoned by the same cryptic letter that Eleanor had received. He was her cousin, and he was the only one who knew what was happening. His grandmother, before she died, told him of the family curse, and how one by one the keepers disappeared in Serafina's labyrinth. He understood that what he had to do was more than dangerous, but he couldn't leave Eleanor. He too was a clockmaker and understood the secrets of time. He knew that the heart of the clock chose its keeper, and that it was Eleanor now. When he arrived in the town, he felt its strange energy. It was like time itself had slowed down and gone backwards, and he realized what his grandmother had told him was not just a story. Samuel followed Eleanor's trail to the old clock shop and saw it was not what it seemed, that it was not just a shop, but a portal to another place, a portal into the abyss itself. He entered the clock's labyrinth, like stepping on thin ice, which could break at any moment, sending him into the cold water. The labyrinth was a chaotic place, where time shifted and twisted, where the walls seemed endless, and where the shadows always watched him, as if waiting to swallow him whole. Samuel saw figures moving in the shadows, figures that seemed human, but were not. They were threads of time, taking shape, the souls of the keepers trapped by Serafina. They looked like dark puppets, as if they had lost their individuality. He felt particles of the clock embedding themselves in his body, in his mind, and he felt like he was gradually losing himself in this place. As he ventured deeper, he heard the ticking of clocks growing louder and louder, echoing through the corridors, and he felt a constant pull, as if he was being drawn toward the center of the labyrinth, to the heart of the clock. He also began hearing whispers, just at the edge of his hearing, and they told him to turn back, that it was a trap, and that he would never save her, that he would just become one of them. He ignored them, understanding that these were the voices of those who had previously tried to save her, and had failed, as if they were beckoning him into their prison. He understood he had to save Eleanor, and he would fight for her until the end. On the 10th of June, Samuel found Eleanor. She stood in the middle of a great clockwork heart, like a doll placed on a shelf, and she was no longer the same. Her eyes were empty, her skin pale, and her movements were jerky and mechanical, and she no longer seemed to recognize him, as if her soul had abandoned her body. The woman, Serafina, was there as well, weaving and unraveling the threads of time, using Eleanor as a tool, a part of her terrifying creation. He saw that the pieces of the clock embedded in him had now become a part of his soul, and they would never leave him. He knew that with every passing second, He was getting closer to becoming the new keeper, the new heart of the clock. Samuel realized he could not save Eleanor as he hoped. He would have to break the clock and destroy the labyrinth, and in doing so, he would risk not only his life but his soul. He knew that was the only way to free her and bring peace to his family. But he himself would be forever tied to that terrible place. Serafina spoke to him, her voice like the rustling of the wind, offering to join her and become a part of eternity. She said that he could become the master of time if he accepted her offer. He knew she was trying to lure him into her trap, just like she did with everyone else. On the 15th of June, Samuel began dismantling the clock, piece by piece, gear by gear, doing it cautiously, methodically. The clock seemed to fight him at every step, as if it was alive and did not want to die. Each gear caused him pain, as if he was ripping them out of his own body, and the voices of the past haunted him, like ghosts. As he worked, the labyrinth around him began to crumble. The walls started to collapse, and the shadows retreated as if trying to escape the light that was now coming from the clock. Serafina tried to stop him, screamed at him, but she was tied to the threads and could only watch as her world was destroyed, feeling her helplessness. She knew the heart would choose a new keeper and that she could not stop it. With each gear he removed, he felt himself becoming more and more part of the clock, as if the clockwork heart was trying to consume him, as if the clock was trying to make him its own. He saw fragments of Serafina's life. He felt her pain and obsession. He realized that Serafina wasn't always a villain, but her obsession and fear had made her who she was now. He managed to remove the clockwork heart, the source of the labyrinth's power and Eleanor's prison. And with that, the whole labyrinth began to crumble, like a house of cards, and it turned to dust, as if it never even existed. When he took out the heart, he saw that it was beating, like it was alive, and that it was filled with dark energy, like the heart of an evil god. He knew this dark energy was now his curse. On the 21st of June, Samuel found himself outside the clock shop. The town was no longer shrouded in mist, the sky clear and blue, as if time had returned to its normal rhythm. But at the same time, he felt something had changed forever. The clock shop was nothing more than rubble, and Serafina was gone, as if she had never existed. Eleanor was standing by him, but she was not the same. She was silent, empty, and did not seem to recognize him, as if her soul was lost forever in the labyrinth. She looked at Samuel with blank eyes, as if nothing was left in them. Samuel felt the heart begin to beat within him, and he knew he would face the same destiny, that he was doomed to become the new keeper. Samuel took Eleanor home and tried to help her, but she never recovered. She lived the rest of her days in a silence that echoed the town where she had almost lost herself, often staring into nothingness, as if seeing something that was hidden from others. Samuel never returned to Silent Hollow and never made another clock. He destroyed all of his tools, and he tried to forget everything that happened in that cursed place. But the heart was still beating within him, never letting him have peace. He understood that some things should never be touched, that the threads of time should not be unraveled, and that some secrets were best left buried. To this day, Silent Hollow remains a town lost to time, with no record of it existing on any map. Some say it never existed, that it was just a figment of our imagination, just a story, a fabrication for children. But sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear the faint ticking of clocks in the wind, and you can feel a chill, as if someone or something is watching you from the shadows, waiting for their keeper. The last entry found in Samuel's journal was dated July 7th. He wrote, "Some threads should never be touched. The heart always beats for the one it chose. I feel it consuming me. I knew this would happen. I feel like I am becoming what I always ran from. I am becoming the new keeper, and I will face eternal imprisonment. I hope that Eleanor finds peace. I hope this story will never repeat again." Then, a single drawing of the clock, with the clockwork heart missing, and after that, silence, as if his heart stopped, and he ceased to exist. The Whispering Labyrinth of Blackwood Manor. The year is 1928. October had sunk its teeth into the countryside, painting the leaves in hues of dying fire, and a chill wind, smelling of damp earth and decay, whistled through the skeletal branches of the ancient oaks surrounding Blackwood Manor. It was in this desolate setting, beneath a sky that seemed to weep perpetually, that young Arthur Finch, a historian of forgotten lore, arrived, drawn by the siren call of an enigma that had haunted his family for generations. Blackwood Manor, perched atop a windswept hill overlooking the somber moors, was not merely a house. It was a repository of whispers, a labyrinth built from shadows and secrets. The locals spoke of it with hushed reverence, their eyes wide with fear, claiming that the very stones hummed with an unholy energy, that the souls of the departed were trapped within its walls, forever searching for a way to escape or perhaps to drag others down with them into the abyss. They told stories about lights appearing in the windows at night and about screams heard on the wind. Arthur had received a letter, delivered by an old woman with eyes as cold as the October sky and skin like aged parchment. The parchment, brittle with age and smelling of dried lavender and something far more sinister, was penned in elegant but unsettling calligraphy, promising revelations about the Finch family's history, a history entwined with the dark legacy of Blackwood. It mentioned a hidden chamber, a collection of artifacts, and the chilling warning: some doors are best left unopened, some truths are best left undisturbed. He arrived on the 1st of October, a day that felt heavier than the rest, the sun a weak, pale disk in the bruised sky, the air thick with the scent of rain and decay. As he approached the manor, a sense of dread washed over him, the air thick with a palpable weight of sorrow and decay, and the feeling that something was watching him from the windows. The house, with its Gothic architecture and darkened windows, seemed to leer at him, its silence a far cry from the peaceful solitude he had anticipated. The massive oak doors, weathered and scarred and smelling of ancient wood and mildew, groaned open as if beckoning him inside, as if they were alive. He stepped into a cavernous hall, where shadows danced like phantom figures, and the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and old parchment, a hint of decay that made him shiver, with something else hidden underneath that smelt like blood and death. He heard a whisper, just at the edge of his hearing, calling his name, sounding like a voice he knew from a dream he had long forgotten, but one that made his blood run cold. The first week passed in a blur of exploration and unease. Each room of the manor seemed to have its own distinct personality, a collection of antique furniture, decaying portraits whose eyes seemed to follow him, and strange objects that seemed to pulse with a hidden energy. He found diaries filled with fragmented tales of madness and despair, penned in frantic handwriting that seemed to leap off the page, and he found old maps that seemed to shift each time he looked at them, revealing new passages and hidden chambers. The library, a vast chamber lined with shelves overflowing with books bound in leather and smelling of old paper and dust, seemed to breathe around him. Some of the books were written in languages he had never seen before, their pages filled with disturbing drawings and diagrams, and others seemed to hum with a strange energy when he touched them, making his skin crawl. It was in the library, on the 7th day of his stay, as the walls seemed to close in around him, that he found a hidden passage, concealed behind a bookshelf that seemed to move on its own, creating a passage. The passage led him to a winding staircase that spiraled downwards into the bowels of the manor, deeper than he had imagined, the stone cold to the touch and slick with moisture. The air grew colder, the darkness denser, and the whispering voices became more persistent, more insistent, more desperate. He felt as if the very walls were trying to tell him something, trying to warn him, and that he was walking in footsteps of those who went before. At the bottom of the stairs was a stone door with intricate carvings, depicting grotesque figures locked in eternal torment, their faces frozen in silent screams. He could see a faint, pulsing light through the cracks in the door, and he could hear the sound of something that sounded like clockwork, but much more sinister, each tick and tock making his heart race with dread. On the 10th of October, as he explored the upper levels of the manor, he found a peculiar key, hidden inside an old clock in one of the upstairs rooms. The key was cold to the touch and felt smooth like bone, and it was made from some strange metal, a material he had never encountered before. It seemed to hum with energy when he held it, sending shivers down his spine, and he felt a pull, as if the key was alive and longed to be in the lock. Driven by a morbid fascination and a growing sense of dread, Arthur inserted the key into the lock on the stone door. With a grating sound that echoed through the depths of the manor, the door swung open, revealing a circular chamber, unlike any other he had ever seen. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting a distorted image of the room and of himself, his reflection seeming to shift and flicker, and his eyes looking older and more tired. In the center of the room was a complex mechanical device, a labyrinth of gears and levers, all crafted from black metal and polished bone that felt both cold and oddly alive. The device seemed to hum with an unholy energy, a low, resonant thrumming that vibrated in his teeth and bones, and it was this energy that pulsed through the room, creating strange, swirling shadows on the walls that seemed to watch him with malevolent intent. It was as if the very room was breathing with some malevolent intent, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding that seeped into his very soul, and he felt like he was being consumed from the inside. He felt a pull, as if the device was trying to pull him inside, as if it wanted to absorb him into its intricate workings. As Arthur examined the mechanism, running his fingers over its cold, bone-like surface, he realized it was more than just a machine. It was a gateway, a doorway into something else, something beyond the realm of human understanding. He touched a lever, and the room began to shift around him. The mirrors seemed to crack and twist like tortured glass, reflecting distorted images of other places, other times, of other realities, all filled with a terrible sadness and fear. He saw figures in the mirrors, fleeting glimpses of people trapped in various stages of despair, in endless loops of pain and suffering. It was like watching a twisted version of his own memories, of his fears and regrets, and they seemed to reach out to him, begging for help he could not offer. The voices became louder, more desperate, calling to him by name, pleading with him to join them in their eternal torment, to share in their suffering. The clockwork mechanism seemed to pulse with a terrifying heartbeat, its rhythm resonating in his very bones. It was the heartbeat of a dying universe, a black hole that was swallowing everything around it. He realized that the heart was not just a mechanism, it was a living, breathing thing, a parasitic entity that was trying to become part of him, to merge with his soul and consume his being. He found a journal on a small table in the center of the room, a table that was made of bone and covered with dust and dried blood. The journal was written by a woman named Alara Blackwood, the original owner of the manor centuries ago. Alara was a woman who was obsessed with time and space, believing that she could become a god by mastering them. She had built this device in an attempt to manipulate time, believing that she could open doors into other dimensions, to rewrite history, to alter reality itself, but she had failed. She wrote of her failures in frantic prose. She had started her work full of confidence and hope, but her entries turned darker and darker as the device took control. She wrote of the horrors that she had seen, of the twisted creatures that lurked beyond the veil, waiting for their chance to come through. She wrote of the sacrifices she had made, of the people she had used to power her device. Her final entry was written in a desperate hand, smeared with blood and ink, claiming that the device had turned against her, that the labyrinth had consumed her and her soul was now trapped inside, that her mind was breaking and her memories were becoming corrupted. She wrote that she had become one of the threads in the fabric of this place, and that she was now waiting for someone else to take her place, for someone to become the new keeper. Arthur began to understand the terrible truth, the full extent of Alara's madness. Blackwood Manor was not just haunted, it was a prison, a place where time had become fractured, where the boundaries between the living and the dead were blurred, where sanity went to die, and where hope could no longer exist. The device in the chamber was not a mere machine, but a living entity, a heart of darkness that pulsed with an insidious rhythm, drawing in unsuspecting souls and consuming them, turning them into fuel for its eternal hunger. Each person who had entered the manor, lured by its secrets, had become a thread in the labyrinth's fabric, and that they were now forever bound to this place, their consciousness broken, their wills dissolved into the fabric of the mansion. Arthur felt a dread creep into his soul, a cold despair that spread through his bones. He understood that he was now one of the threads, that he was becoming a part of this terrifying place, and his mind started to fill with despair. He understood that he too was doomed, He spent the next 2 weeks trying to find a way to escape the manor, but each attempt to leave only seemed to deepen his entrapment. The hallways shifted and changed, doorways moved and vanished at random, and the whispering voices grew louder and more frantic, the voices of those who had come before him, begging him to join them in their torment. He saw the ghosts of the former residents, their faces gaunt and hollow, trapped in endless loops of their past, forever repeating the moments of their deaths and despair, their cries echoing throughout the mansion. He heard them call out his name, begging him for help, but he knew that they were beyond any help, that they were nothing but hollow shells of their former selves. The labyrinth was playing with his mind. It was torturing him, by showing him his deepest fears and regrets, by twisting his memories and emotions, slowly breaking him down. The manor started to shift in ways that made no sense. The laws of physics ceased to exist, the space around him became fluid, and even his own body felt strange and unreliable. The mirrors in the chamber reflected distorted images of his past, of his childhood home, now twisted and ruined, of his dead parents, now looking like grotesque parodies of themselves, of his failures and regrets, now magnified and unbearable. He had lost track of the days. Time felt fractured, sometimes moving in reverse, sometimes stopping completely, and sometimes he was not even sure if he was in the past, present, or in a twisted future, and sometimes he saw things that could not exist and heard whispers that could not be understood. The device, he realized, was not just a trap for the body. It was a trap for the mind, a parasite that fed on his sanity and his soul. His soul felt like it was being slowly pulled apart, like he was fading away, like he was becoming nothing. He was starting to forget his past. His memories were getting replaced by distorted fragments of the labyrinth, by the voices and the faces that surrounded him. His mind felt like it was being broken down into pieces, and those pieces were being used to fuel the labyrinth. On the 30th of October, Arthur had a moment of horrifying clarity, as if something broke through the fog in his mind. He realized that the device was powered by the souls it had trapped, by their fear and their despair, and that every attempt to escape only made the labyrinth stronger. He realized that he would never leave the manor, not in the way he wanted to, not as the man he once was. His only chance for freedom was to destroy the device, even if it meant destroying himself in the process, even if it meant becoming part of the labyrinth, and to take those souls with him. His body felt heavy, his mind confused, and his movements were jerky and mechanical, his limbs moving as if controlled by strings. He felt that he was no longer himself, that he was slowly becoming part of the mechanism, and his consciousness was fading away, like he was a candle that was slowly burning out. He had become one of the threads in Alara's tapestry, and he was ready to break it apart. He understood that he was doomed, but now it did not scare him. He returned to the chamber, his eyes hollow and his face gaunt, determined to dismantle the device, to stop the beating heart of the labyrinth, even if it meant his own destruction. As he touched the first lever, the room began to convulse. The mirrors cracked and shattered, like the screams of trapped souls, and the whispering voices grew into a deafening scream, a cacophony of despair that echoed throughout the manor. It was like all the lost souls were crying out for release. The device seemed to resist his efforts. The black metal grew hot to the touch, burning his flesh, and the levers seemed to twist and turn to avoid his grasp. Each gear, each lever felt like a living thing, fighting him at every turn, and each piece that he broke seemed to tear into his own soul, causing him agonizing pain. He saw visions of Alara, her eyes full of madness, her lips curved into a cruel smile. She was enjoying his pain. She was reveling in his torment. He knew that he was doomed, but he would not surrender. He had become the keeper. He was now forever bound to this place, and he would become another whisper in the walls. But he would be the last whisper, the last scream. On the last day of October, as the clock tower chimed the stroke of midnight, Arthur managed to dislodge the final piece, the heart of the device, a pulsating black sphere that seemed to writhe in his hands. As he did, the chamber shook violently. The mirrors shattered into a million pieces, their shards flying around like razors, and the whispering voices fell silent, replaced by an unnatural silence that was far more terrifying than any scream. The malevolent energy that filled the room seemed to be pulled away, leaving behind only a void, a gaping hole in reality. There was a moment of perfect silence, and then the chamber began to crumble. The ceiling collapsed, and the walls caved in, pulling everything down into the abyss. The manor, for a brief moment, was bathed in a bright, blinding light, and then it disappeared from the face of this world, as if it never existed, leaving behind nothing but an empty hill overlooking the somber moors, the land seeming slightly scarred from where the manor once stood. But the whispers remain, carried on the wind, chilling anyone who hears them. Some say that on nights when the wind is cold, the whispers can still be heard, carried on the breeze, seeming to call to anyone that is near, beckoning them to come closer. Some say that if you listen closely to the silence, you can hear the faint tick of gears and the desperate pleas of those who are still trapped within the labyrinth of Blackwood Manor and waiting for someone to set them free. The local people still fear the place where the manor once stood, and no one dares to go near it. They know that the souls of those who were consumed are still waiting for someone to come along and take their place, to become the next keeper, the next thread in Alara's tapestry. And every year, on the last day of October, a single letter is delivered, bearing a message of warning and an invitation to step into the whispers of the labyrinth, to become another ghost. The last entry found in Arthur's diary was written in fragmented prose, smeared with his own blood. The threads, they are everywhere. I am becoming one. The gears, the screams, hear the whispers, the heart beats for those who are lost. My mind fades. It is calling me. Then there was a single drawing, a crude sketch of a labyrinth that had no beginning and no end, and his face drawn in the middle of it, screaming in pain. Then there was only silence. The Blackwood whispers. The flickering fluorescent lights of the abandoned Blackwood Asylum hummed a discordant tune, their pale glow barely penetrating the thick, dust-laden air. It was October 27th, 1973, and the wind howled outside like a tormented soul, mirroring the unease that settled deep in my bones. For weeks, I, Elias Thorne, had been plagued by vivid dreams of this place. A looming silhouette against a stormy sky, the echoing cries of unseen patients, a dark mirror beckoning from the depths. It was as if Blackwood was calling me, pulling me towards its dark heart. My research into this place had only fueled this obsession. Tonight, I knew, was the night I'd finally unravel the secrets whispered about this place for decades. Blackwood. It was a name that sent shivers down the spines of the locals. Stories of inhumane experiments, of patients driven to madness and beyond, of screams echoing through the night, had clung to the place like a shroud. I had meticulously researched Blackwood for months, poring over archived records and faded newspaper articles. The more I learned, the more I was drawn to its dark allure, a deep, unsettling curiosity that was starting to feel a bit more like a compulsion. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing peeling paint and rusted medical equipment. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and unsettling, like old blood mixed with ozone. In the main ward, where rows of empty beds stood like skeletal sentinels, I found a journal. Its cover, leather and worn, was embossed with the asylum's name in faded gold lettering. I felt a strange sense of recognition, as if I had seen this journal in my dreams. The first entry, dated July 15th, 1951, was written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. It belonged to Dr. Alastair Finch, the asylum's director. He wrote of a new patient, a young woman named Eleanor Vance, who had arrived in a state of severe catatonia. But there was something else, something that made Finch deeply uneasy. He wrote of Vance's eyes, their unsettling depth, their unnatural stillness, and a strange, flickering light that seemed to ignite within their depths when she was agitated. He described them as windows into another world, as if they were reflecting something that wasn't of this earth. As I turned the pages, the entries became more disturbing. Dr. Finch wrote of increasingly bizarre treatments, of attempts to unlock Vance's mind through experimental procedures. He mentioned a secret project he called the Obsidian Mirror, an attempt to use Vance's unique mental state to bridge the gap between our world and something else, something he called the Veiled Realm. The language was esoteric, almost delusional, filled with references to ancient texts and forgotten rituals. He detailed his experiments in a small room in the basement. He also started to reference that he had received instructions from an unseen entity through Eleanor. He referred to it as the guiding light, something that seemed to make Eleanor even more agitated. Further along, he talks about his staff who started acting strangely. One by one, they became disoriented, starting to speak in strange tongues, acting aggressive and delusional themselves. A nurse, Margaret Bell, was the first to openly become completely hostile towards the rest of the medical team and tried to harm a patient. Her eyes wide and pupils dilated, as if she was looking at something no one else could see. The last journal entry, dated November 3rd, 1951, was short and panicked. Finch claimed the veil was thinning and that something was coming for them all. He believed that the patients had become portals. He stopped writing from that day forward, the last words scribbled almost illegibly. The light, it sees all, it consumes. I spent a total of 4 hours in the asylum, reading Dr. Finch's journal under the weak beam of my flashlight. The journal itself was quite a thick book, having over 300 pages. In the final pages, Finch starts referring to his team and patients as vessels, something that was starting to be common in his vocabulary. The entries were getting less frequent and were becoming more and more chaotic. The last one was written on November the 3rd, the day when all the staff and patients vanished without a trace. The last phrase was scrawled messily on the bottom of the page. The light, it calls to us all. The letters looked shaky, as if they were written by someone who was losing their grip on reality. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt that the room was getting colder, the air growing thick with a metallic tang. It felt like something had just shifted, the silence growing heavier and more oppressive. I closed the journal, not wanting to read more, and stood up to look around. That was when I heard the first whisper. It was soft, just like a breeze, a breath on my ear, but I heard it so clearly. My name, Elias. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no one around. I quickly pointed my flashlight around, but the only thing that surrounded me were the beds and some equipment scattered on the floor, casting long, distorted shadows. It was like the building itself was breathing. My blood ran cold. I was not alone. I tried to rationalize it that maybe the wind was playing tricks on me, but then I heard it again, louder this time. Elias. The voice was no longer soft, but a raspy whisper, like dry leaves rustling in the wind. I started walking toward the main corridor, my flashlight shaking in my hand. My mind was racing, all the stories I have heard about Blackwood starting to make sense, the unease in my chest turning into a cold dread. I reached a set of stairs and descended to the basement. The lower I went, the colder and darker it got, the metallic smell becoming more intense. The air grew heavy, and the smell of decay was becoming unbearable, now mixed with a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. I walked to the end of the corridor to reach the door where Dr. Finch talked about conducting his experiments. The door was locked, and there was a strange symbol etched into the wood that I could not identify. It looked ancient, almost like a rune. I tried to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. My eyes landed on a small window next to the door, and I quickly tried to break it open. After a few tries, the old glass shattered and fell to the floor with a clatter, shards of glass reflecting the beam of my light like small, sharp teeth. I reached inside and unlocked the door. The moment I stepped inside, my flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into the pitch black, a profound darkness that felt almost tangible. I pulled my lighter out and lit it, and the light was enough to see the room around me, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. It was small and square, with bare concrete walls, the surface covered in a sticky residue. In the middle, I saw the infamous obsidian mirror, a circular, dark slab of polished obsidian, set within a metallic frame, its surface reflecting the light of my lighter like a dark, bottomless abyss. It pulsed slightly, as if it was breathing, and it felt like it was drawing me in, an irresistible force that I could not fight. I slowly walked towards it, drawn by some kind of dark curiosity, a morbid fascination that I could not resist. I reached out to touch the mirror when a voice echoed in my head, and it was not my own. It was a chorus of voices, whispering my name in a multitude of tones, some soft and gentle, others harsh and demanding, all calling to me. Elias, join us, become one of us. The room around me started to shift. The walls became blurry. The air thickened, as if I had stepped into another dimension. I felt lightheaded, and my vision started to fade to black, the room seeming to dissolve into a sea of swirling colors. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in front of the mirror, but the room was not the same. It was still the same room, but the concrete walls were gone, replaced by a swirling, nebulous void. There were no walls around me, but a dark, endless expanse of nothingness. The air thick with the metallic tang and cloying sweetness, now mixed with the smell of old parchment. And in that void, I saw faces staring back at me, their eyes fixated on me with a predatory intensity. They were gaunt, pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to burn with an inner light, their skin stretched tightly over their bones. Some had elongated limbs, others had multiple sets of eyes, and they all looked at me with a strange kind of familiarity, a silent recognition that chilled me to the core. They started reaching out to me, their hands passing through the mirror, their fingers long and spindly, ending in sharp claws. I tried to pull away, but my feet were glued to the ground, my body heavy and unresponsive. The voices started getting louder, their whispers turning into guttural moans, chanting my name over and over again, a chorus of tormented souls. I felt something grab my hands, their touch icy cold and clammy, their grip surprisingly strong. The faces started to get closer, their breath hot and fetid on my skin, and the metallic smell was becoming stronger, now mixed with a scent of decay and old grave dirt. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, my throat paralyzed with terror. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if something was piercing my flesh, and then the world turned to black again, a vast and unending oblivion. The next thing I remember, I was laying on the cold floor of the basement, the obsidian mirror in front of me, its surface now rippling like water, the room exactly the same as before, the lighter still flickering weakly on the floor beside me. I looked at my hands and there were small, raised, red marks on my wrist, as if something had grabbed them, leaving behind an unnatural chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I was breathing heavily, my body trembling with a cold sweat. I stood up and backed away from the mirror, my gaze fixed on it as if it were a venomous creature ready to strike. I knew that I had to get out of there. I ran, not caring where I was going, only that I had to escape the dark presence that had latched itself onto me. I bolted out of the basement, up the stairs, and out the main doors of the asylum, the image of those faces seared into my mind. I ran and ran until I reached my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked back at the old building as I started my car, the wind howling around it like a mournful dirge. The windows were all dark and empty, but for a brief moment, I thought I saw a face in one of the windows, its eyes burning with a familiar light. It was Eleanor Vance, but something was different, something sinister and malevolent. I drove home, shaken to my core, the feeling of dread never leaving me. I spent the next few days trying to make sense of what I experienced, the memories of the void and the creatures from beyond haunting my waking hours. I tried to dismiss it as a hallucination, that the stress had gotten to me, but there was a feeling deep inside my gut that it was all real, that I had witnessed something that was beyond human comprehension. I was pulled to go back, but I knew I shouldn't, that to do so would be to surrender myself to the forces that were now chasing me. The obsidian mirror was not just an object, it was a gateway, a conduit to a realm of unimaginable horror. I decided to write everything down, everything I had experienced, hoping that by putting it on paper, I could somehow gain some control over the terror that was consuming me. I wrote all the events in the form of a report, wanting to make sense of what had happened, a desperate attempt to understand the madness I had witnessed. I looked for the journal again, but it was gone. I had no idea how, but it was not with me anymore, as if it had vanished into thin air, replaced by a blank spot in my memory. I couldn't even remember where I put it, a strange sense of disorientation settling in. I tried to dismiss this too, but something felt terribly wrong, like my memories were being tampered with. I tried to sleep, but I kept seeing those faces in the dark void, reaching out to me, their eyes burning into my soul. I was sure they would come for me, that no matter where I hid, they would find me. I decided to investigate the asylum's history more, digging through old archives and police records from the 1950s. In them, I found that the asylum was closed not long after the events described in Dr. Finch's journal. It wasn't due to malpractice or poor management, but because everyone disappeared. All staff and patients vanished without a single trace, leaving behind nothing but empty rooms and a lingering sense of dread. The police had searched every corner, but they couldn't find a single person, as if they had been swallowed whole by the earth. They even checked the records to find their family members, but nothing. It was as if they ceased to exist, their existence wiped clean from the face of the planet. I tried searching for more information on Dr. Finch himself, but he was as if he was never there. Not in any records, not in any census, nothing. All of this was becoming more and more unexplainable, the pieces of the puzzle not quite fitting together, leaving me with an overwhelming sense of dread. That was when I decided to go back to Blackwood, a decision I knew was reckless and foolish, but one that I could not resist. I had to see if the mirror was still there, if I could somehow make sense of the horrors I had witnessed, even if it meant risking my life. The thought of it was terrifying, but the draw was too strong to ignore, an irresistible pull that was becoming more and more difficult to resist. It was November the 12th, 1973, the air thick with the scent of impending storm. The weather was the same, gloomy and windy, the sky a canvas of bruised purple and gray, mirroring the turmoil within my soul. I arrived at the asylum and walked inside, the heavy doors groaning as they opened, as if the building itself was welcoming me back. Everything was exactly the same as it was before, the same dust, the same decay, the same oppressive silence, but something was different, as if the atmosphere had become more charged, more malevolent. It felt like I was expected, like the building itself was aware of my presence, waiting for me to arrive. I started to walk to the basement again, carefully this time, but I felt like I was moving on my own, my feet carrying me without my conscious control. Like something was pulling me forward, guiding me towards my fate. I reached the room where the obsidian mirror was located. It was still there, in the middle of the room, its dark surface pulsing with an inner light, as if it had never moved, as if time itself had no hold over it. The obsidian seemed darker, more menacing, its surface now mirroring a distorted version of my own face, my eyes wide and filled with a terrifying recognition. I did not feel the overwhelming urge to touch it this time, but I could feel something was drawing me closer still, an invisible force that was tugging at my very being. As I looked at it, I saw something reflected in the dark surface, not my own reflection, but a scene from the past, a glimpse into the asylum's dark history. I saw Dr. Finch, his face now gaunt and hollow, conducting his experiments on Eleanor Vance. He was strapping her into a chair, her body covered in strange symbols, his face illuminated by the dim light, a manic glint in his eyes. She was screaming, her voice hoarse and broken, her body thrashing against the restraints, but he ignored her, his face contorted into a grotesque parody of a smile. He spoke of opening the gates to the veiled realm, of obtaining knowledge beyond human comprehension, his words slurring together in a disturbing jumble. He stared into the mirror, a manic glint in his eyes, a sinister smile on his face, as if he was not all there, as if he was possessed by some dark entity. He was not in control, he was merely a vessel for something ancient and evil. The vision shifted, and I saw the other patients, all of them with vacant stares, their eyes reflecting the same strange light as Eleanor, their bodies moving as if they were puppets controlled by an unseen hand. They were being herded towards the obsidian mirror, their limbs moving in jerky, unnatural motions, their faces devoid of all emotion, all sense of self. It was like I was watching a film, a horrifying tableau of madness and despair, a glimpse into the true nature of Blackwood's horrors. I saw Nurse Margaret dragging one of the patients towards the mirror, her eyes wide and black, her skin pale and translucent. A disturbing smile stretched across her lips. The scene was horrific and disturbing, a terrifying glimpse into the fate that awaited me. As more and more patients walked closer to the mirror, they started to fade away, their bodies dissolving into the dark void, their screams silenced before they could escape their lips. The vision changed once more, and I saw myself standing in the same room, my hand outstretched towards the mirror, the same faces reaching out to me, their eyes fixed on me with a hungry gaze. It was as if the past and the present were merging, blurring together into one single, unending nightmare, the boundaries of reality dissolving into chaos. I felt the same chill, the same fear, the same suffocating dread, and I tried to pull away, to resist the pull of the darkness, but it was too late. The darkness had already claimed me. The void had already become a part of my being. The dark void started to surround me again, a swirling vortex of nothingness that seemed to consume everything in its path. The faces were back, their voices louder, their hands reaching, grabbing, their touch like icy claws that tore through my flesh. I felt the same sharp pain, the same suffocating darkness closing in, squeezing the life out of me, a sense of utter despair washing over me. Then, all at once, it stopped, leaving me gasping for breath. I was back in the room, the mirror in front of me, its surface calm once more, as if it had never shown me the horrors from beyond. I blinked a couple of times, trying to orient myself. It had just been a moment, but it felt like hours had passed, an eternity of terror and despair. I was standing in the middle of the room, the mirror in front of me. I knew now, I was the next to be taken, my fate sealed by my own morbid curiosity. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest, and started to run as fast as I could, not turning back to see what was behind me, my mind screaming in terror. As I was running through the dark corridors, I could hear the voices chasing me, their whispers growing louder, their chants turning into guttural moans. It was the same chorus of whispers calling my name, Elias, Elias, join us. I ran past the main ward, the shadows seeming to reach out to me, down the stairs, my feet slipping on the decaying wood, through the old entrance doors, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I turned to look back, I saw them. They were standing in the corridors, watching me, their pale faces illuminated by the moonlight, their eyes burning with a cold, unholy light. Their hands were reaching towards me, their eyes filled with a strange, haunting sorrow, a mixture of longing and malevolence. I started my car, almost ripping the key in my rush, and drove off, my hands shaking on the wheel. The image of those faces seared into my mind. I did not stop driving until I reached the other side of the state, my nerves raw and frayed, my body trembling with exhaustion. I decided to stop at a motel and try to make sense of everything, to find some semblance of calm in the chaos that was consuming me. When I went to wash my face in the bathroom, I looked in the mirror and almost screamed, my body recoiling in terror. My eyes were no longer the same. They had changed. Something had altered their nature, transforming them into something alien and terrifying. They were starting to look the same as Eleanor Vance's, with the same unsettling depth, the same unnatural stillness, and when I focused hard enough, I could see the same strange flickering light ignited within their depths, the same unholy fire that I had witnessed in the eyes of the entities from the void. I tried to look away, to break the gaze that was consuming me, but I couldn't, as if some unseen force was compelling me to stare into my own reflection. It was as if something was forcing me to look at them, as if the obsidian mirror had transferred itself into my own reflection, its dark power now residing within me. I knew that I was not safe, that no matter where I ran, they would always be with me, their influence now seeping into my soul. They are now part of me, a terrifying parasite that has taken root in my very being. I am just another portal, another vessel, destined to become another lost soul within the veiled realm. I know that they are coming for me, that it is only a matter of time before I am gone too, joining the other lost souls who have been consumed by the darkness. I can feel them. They are getting closer. I see them. I wrote this down as a warning to all who will dare to seek the truth about Blackwood Asylum, a desperate plea for sanity in the face of unimaginable horror. Do not go there, do not approach that place. Do not look for it, do not even think about it. If you hear the whispers, if you feel the chill, if the shadows seem to lengthen in an unnatural way, run, flee as far away as you can, for it is already too late for you. Do not look back, for the eyes of the void are watching, and they will claim you if you dare to linger too long. The veiled realm is waiting, and it is hungry, always hungry, devouring everything in its path. The light is calling, and it will consume us all. I feel them. They are here. I am